Welcome to A Little Higher. Today we are going to talk about neurodiversity and cannabis and other plants and how we can support the neurodiversity, the neurodiverse brain. We're going to talk about that. And I'm here with Miyabe Shields, who is a endocannabinoid scientist, has their PhD in pharmaceutical science, and we're going to talk about all of it. So Miyabe, tell us a little bit more about who you are, what you do in your work, and then let's talk about neurodiversity.
Yeah, so I'm a pharmaceutical scientist by training, and I studied structural biochemistry of the system in the brain that interacts with cannabis, the endocannabinoid system. So I was looking at the parts of our brain and body that when we use cannabis, that's what causes its effects. And the reason why I went in to do my PhD studying that is because cannabis saved my life, still saves my life to this day, and is foundationally the number one thing that has helped me with a bunch of different things, like a lot of complex comorbid issues. And that when I did study it, I realized that there's a huge basis, scientific basis for how that could work, but that people don't want to talk about neurodiversity. People don't want to talk about the neurodivergent community. People don't want to talk about mental health and cannabis.
Right.
Because there's a double stigma with talking about both of those things. And when I started talking about it a little bit, it was shocking the amount of people that felt significantly about hearing that information because it's been kept from all of us.
I mean, some of my favorite content that you put out on neurodiversity, and you're going to have to explain what that word is for anyone listening, because it's not a new word, but it's starting to become more prolific in conversation, particularly on social media. So tell us what neurodiversity is.
Yeah, so neurodiversity just means a diversity or a different number of brains. Neuro would be brains. So it's like any type of difference in brain, and this could be, it's an umbrella term. So an umbrella term is something that encompasses many other terms underneath it. So an example for an umbrella term in the LGBTQ community is queer. Okay. Because queer encompasses multiple terms that are other different labels. In the same way, neurodivergent kind of encompasses many different things, and it's different depending on different people will associate neurodiversity and being neurodivergent maybe more with autism or ADHD, because that has been a focus of the movement and self-advocates, but that actually, it's my opinion that neurodivergent encompasses a bunch of things, but I also don't believe in diagnosis. Right. I believe that diagnosis can be useful, and I think that's what we were talking about earlier today. I think diagnosis can be possible at a positive thing, but I don't think the reason why I identify personally as neurodivergent is because I've been diagnosed with almost everything, right? And that it doesn't really make sense for me to pick another label when neurodivergent just means outside of the norm or the typical realm.
And who is to define?
I don't think it exists. Honestly, I'm not sure if neurotypical people exist. I mean, or if it's not just neurodivergent people who are not aware or have lesser needs or have more resources, have more financial resources or community supports or the ability to accommodate their lives so that they don't have disability. Right. Because disability is in part socially constructed. Yeah. It's disability is just if we have challenges, right? And different challenges with different environments and stuff. So so neurodivergent means that a brain is divergent. I'm neurodivergent. Okay. Right? Yeah. Neurodiversity is just the diversity that exists.
The spectrum.
Yes. And neurodiverse means a mixture. Okay. So if you're in a room of people, you're always in a neurodiverse room. You are always, every group of people is neurodiverse. And all humans have neurodiversity. Okay. But some people are neurodivergent. Okay. Which means that they are outside a realm that at least society has deemed a typical behavior. Right. Brain functionality.
Right. Rule breakers.
Right. Which that is neuronormativity. Okay. So you can't talk about neurodiversity without neuronormativity. And I want to shout out to Sunny Jane Wise, who is my mentor and educator about this. And I just heard them speak last week. It was wild. Wow. So neuronormativity is the idea that there's one brain type and one type of functionality that is the ideal. It's a hierarchy of brain types.
So just to say something's ideal.
Exactly. So that's
ideal for who?
Capitalism. Right. I don't know. I think production and productivity and maybe it's just ideal for a controlling group or a controlling faction, right?
Right.
So neuronormativity is based upon that social hierarchy. Absolutely. And neurodivergence and neurodiversity is outside of that. So you are neurodivergent if you're not like neuronormative, if you're like behaving outside of that one type of behavior set, a brain type. But it's
fascinating. And there's lots of different, like within each kind of word or diagnosis, there's spectrums within it.
Yeah, and that these diagnoses are like, let's go into that, like whether it's helpful or not, because they're not really real in terms of like, there's no biological evidence, for many of them. For things that are genetic and neurological, like that's a little bit different, like damages that come from like TBI or like even PTSD, things that are acquired, that's like a little bit different. But for many, many, many types of neurodivergence, and even the ones where there is a genetic link, we don't fully understand the molecular mechanism of how that leads to, different types of expressions of that. And there's a big black box there between like what we think we understand and what we do understand. And I was shocked to find out how little we understand about it. Honestly, that was something that was very traumatic for me as a scientist. To fully understand what happened to me was difficult.
So we were talking this morning over breakfast, like, is a professional diagnosis good or bad? And then I think you see a lot of people on social media right now just self-diagnosing themselves and finding comfort and support in that. I've been, in my personal experience, trying to, navigate mental health issues throughout my teenage years into adulthood. I've hated the diagnosis. It puts me into like diagnosis paralysis. It defines me. There is a stigma. I even hold the stigma against myself. It's something I'm trying to constantly break, that this is just who I am.
Because the diagnosis is pathological. Like in the current healthcare system, when you get a diagnosis, it's viewed as a disease.
And we use like fix it.
We use terms like mental illness, and it's not that, We use like it's challenges. And yes, there are things that are symptoms, but they're also just characteristics or traits. So it's complicated because we're framing, and we've been framing neurodivergence, or we've been framing being outside of this neuronormal self as an illness or a sickness, and that we're going to cure it with
that it has to be fixed.
Medicine. So I think that part can be really difficult about diagnosis. And I've been diagnosed. When I was diagnosed with a bunch of things, like, it felt like I should die. I literally, it was making me, it made me suicidal.
Wait, this didn't help.
When I was younger. But then when you're getting diagnosed in that clinical setting, you also are inside that, inside that system in that setting, and it doesn't serve everyone. For the people that are out there that the medical system currently serves and supports in a good way, and you have a good relationship with your doctor, and you have a good and open, trusting relationship, and that you have a good balance with your medicines, and you're responding well to those pharmaceuticals, I am so happy for you. Honestly, important. I wanted that so bad for me. Like, you have no idea. So I'm happy for you. And that's an option. But for a huge number of us, it is absolutely not an option. And it's been tried. And I think that it's okay for us to understand that. And I think it's okay for us to value all of the different ways in which a life can come into balance. About accommodating everything about your life, and not necessarily about building your life around your disability. And not
building your own support system.
Exactly. And not trying to just shape your brain into something that it's just not going to fit in a way.
Stop trying to hit the square peg through the round hole.
But I do think self-diagnosis is valid. And I believe very strongly that people who've done the work and have done and sometimes I will say that I don't even think it should be called self-diagnosis anymore, because I think it's community diagnosis. And I think that
that's huge.
People do not self-diagnose by themselves. It's just not true. If people are self-diagnosing, they're intaking tons of articles and blog posts, and they're finding people that they really mesh with and reading all their content and like learning more about it. Like, when I found Sunny's content, so my wife Lane actually introduced me to Sunny, and they were like, when I was first reading, the stuff and the perspective, it helps you so much.
It does. It really does.
It's so good. It's to have those mentors and models. You're not really self-diagnosing by yourself. You're doing it with the community.
Diagnosis.
And so I think community-based diagnoses are completely valid. I think no one knows you except yourself. Like, I can't say how many times like I've done the clinical diagnosis many different times in many different ways in many different settings, and my most recent one was a big psychanalysis, like
Okay.
with like psychiatrists, like I think multiple psychiatrists, and then psychiatry students that were like
Okay.
working at hospitals, and they do it over 3 days, and it's
Wow.
like this big long.
Did you learn a lot?
I did actually. I did, because it's all sorts of tests and stuff. I love puzzles, so it's like all like that kind of stuff is fun.
Here.
The worst test ever was there was a pamphlet of eyes.
Oh no.
It was like,
What did that tell them?
whether you like looking people in the eye or not, or like whether you prefer it. Because I don't like looking people in the
Okay.
eyes, but I can like definitely get around it, and like
Right.
not,
You've, like
not
learned
hard.
how to
Yeah.
support it.
And I smoke a lot of weed.
Yeah.
It definitely decreases it for me to be high. Like, that's what was one of the first things that allowed me to like make friends, is that like it's important to be able to like connect. And I do think there's some connection that happens at least partially through the ability to like share.
The plant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the other thing about using plants and using drugs in general, like, can I use the word drugs? Like,
yeah.
I feel like drugs are molecules from outside the body that have an effect on us. And I feel like we should stop being like, let's not call them drugs. Like,
Yeah.
they're definitely drugs.
Yeah.
I love drugs. Like, they're good. They can be life-saving things, and they're very helpful for the neurodivergent brain. And I think that's the part that gets really complicated, is that people who are neurodivergent and who struggle with mental health as like a central part of like balancing your life, like, yeah, you're likely to be more vulnerable to things. That makes sense. But that comes from being able to have higher therapeutic reward. So it's all about the balance of understanding like what is the best thing for you that is a net.
Right.
benefit.
And
Like,
you've spent a lot of time talking openly about your cannabis consumption and like how you've figured out the right dose and what time of the day. And
I'm
you've been
on
really intentional about figuring it out, and what works this week might not work next.
right. You have to be like flexible. I'm currently on an experiment that's like rocking my world and my perspective, though.
Tell us about that.
So I did my biggest personal experiment I've ever done was I went 11 months with no cannabis whatsoever. And then I recorded everything in a journal. And actually the information that I gained from that is what led to me being diagnosed on the spectrum. Because the person that I saw was like, everything that you're describing that came back when you stopped using cannabis is like hypersensitivity, like rigidities to routines, like perseveration, and like mostly like sensory hypersensitivity, like my like soft touch sensitivity and like sound sensitivity and stuff.
So what did they give that a word? Because in the last 2 years, someone gave it a word for me: hypersensitive.
Yeah, sensory.
HSP, high sensitive person. Sensitive person.
So that, I mean, that also has to do with emotions, right? Like it gets complicated. So like that's why I think it's so hard. Like I can find myself in almost every diagnosis.
Yeah.
And I think that that's why the labels are so good for finding community and finding like tools and support, and like, but it's like difficult in terms like labels. They don't really mean anything though. So like, as long as you know they don't mean anything, or like, as long as you're not like, I'm only this and like that's the only thing, because it's probably not true.
Right. And
like,
it's evolving constantly.
and we're all changing too.
Yeah.
So like, all of my diagnoses, I was exhibiting vastly different behaviors when I was 19 and 20, right? And all the way.
Yeah, and maturity plays a role in
and life experience and all of that. So yeah, no, definitely important. And then we can regulate ourselves, but like having the knowledge of how to do it. So yeah, my current experiment is that I'm doing the opposite, and I'm spending at least 11 months smoking as much weed as I possibly can.
Love.
And so far, I'm a few months into it, and the end takeaway is that I should have always been smoking way more weed.
So tell me what your typical consumption day looks like.
I wake up and I always smoke with coffee.
Okay.
That's definitely like the way that
And what are you smoking?
I start my day. Usually pretty low, like some sort of mixture of something that's like relatively lower dosed. So I'll mix in like hemp cannabis with regular cannabis. But I will probably now, since I'm upping my dose, it's somewhere like between like 3/4 of a gram, like a full joint, something like that. And I used to maybe just like do like 1/4 of a joint, or just like take a few hits and like, and then basically from there, I drink coffee, and then I'm just maintaining that level all day.
Okay.
So
you're puffing throughout the day.
Yeah, I mean, it also depends on the day, right? Like, and what are you doing, and what are your tasks, and what do you need? Like, if there's a day where you need a lot of energy, I find that like micro dabbing and doing concentrates, not like a full blown dab, but enough that you're definitely feeling it, has helped me with like doing like physical type things. And I like that in general. I always prefer smoking. I'm definitely just a joints person.
The flower.
Also. Yeah. When we started having we didn't start doing it. We just kind of were always open consumption. But with our nonprofit, we're open consumption in all of our meetings. Like, it's encouraged, and it has changed my life to be able to be
Who you are.
and comfortable with it. Like, it's not, I mean, I don't want to say that I'm uncomfortable. Like, it's not like, no, I can say it. It is uncomfortable. Like, when I am not high, my brain for stressful things, it's difficult. I don't have good control over my brain. It's hard. It's like there's a lot going on up here, and weed definitely is like more, it's good for it to be slower. So when people say that weed makes you stupid, it makes you slow, like, it's like, okay, some people, yes. I mean, like, and some people who are using it to an excess, or who are not like being intentional about
Yeah,
that.
everyone has different baselines.
Exactly. Yeah. And for plenty of people, though, it can be super beneficial to be a little slower. Like,
Yeah, it just helps me like organize my thoughts a little bit more. And I'm not so here. I mean, I'm definitely still here.
Yeah.
See Christy laughing right now. No amount of weed will slow that down. But it helps me organize it and like put it into action a little bit better.
And that's what medicines do, right? They help you to do the things that you need to do and be in the right mindset to not be challenged. And essentially, if you think about it in terms of disability, because I don't think disability is a bad word. Like, I'm pretty disabled. Like, I'm not independent, and I've had multiple times in my life where disability is the reason why I can't. It can feel limiting. It can definitely feel like that. But if you view cannabis as something that helps you to function, right? Like, and I'm just saying this theoretically, but it's absolutely true, at least for me. And it's for so many other people, that cannabis helps you with your disability to navigate things that you have to navigate to survive this world, then that's an accommodation. And an accommodation is a legal right for people with disabilities, like reasonable accommodation. And medicines are one of the most classic accommodations that exist for disability. So it's really, that's one of the things with our current study and our data set on people who are high needs patients who use cannabis. 71% of them identifying as neurodivergent was huge. And I mean,
just in case anyone hasn't listened, we have a previous episode where Miyabe and Riley explain the work that they're doing in NAP. Give us a quick overview in case they're just listening to this episode so that they know what that 71% truly represents.
Yeah, so we're doing the largest and most inclusive cannabis consumer study, and we're wanting to include community perspectives in the priorities that are going to drive the research of what our nonprofit does. So we had over 4,500 respondents to the survey, and 91% of them were daily consumers, and 71% of people identified as neurodivergent.
That's huge. And that's like a massive
overlap. It's giant.
That's a massive.
But it's not surprising, is it?
No, and that's kind of what, when, earlier you were talking about like, oh, it's when you don't fit in the system. And I was like, well, that's anyone in the cannabis industry or in the cannabis consumption community.
Anarchists.
We're kind of like checkbox. Okay.
Well, we've been criminal. Some of us, depending on how old we are,
right,
have been criminals from the start.
Yeah.
We were forced to be criminals by the medicine that made us feel alive or allowed us to stay alive. Like, it saved my life. Like, I was 15.
And I feel like that's an issue for anyone like new to figuring out who they are and finding comfort, is there is this stigma to this plant that could really support them. And if they're really looking for a solution because they've been failed, I mean, myself was, I've been put on some crazy things that really hurt me in the long run. And I had to find my own way, not through the medical system, to alternative solutions. And cannabis was one of them. But not everyone always has that like access to it or the support to try it.
This makes me so angry and like hurt. Like, it's like my chest is hurting, like thinking about how not right it is that cannabis isn't the first line for a huge number of things. Like, for example, sleep, pain, or anxiety, which are three giant
everyone has it.
Categories
it doesn't matter
of things. And I think it comes from my personal medical trauma and the things that my brain was on and the amount of processing I've had to do to come to terms with like how little informed consent I really have and how little informed consent I could have had in that situation. And that it's not anyone's fault necessarily. Like, I don't blame my doctors because I was a complicated case of crisis, but cannabis wasn't an option, and cannabis still isn't the first line option, even now, all that we know about it. And so it hurts me because there's so much pain and suffering and trauma that is happening. And there's people who, like, my behavior was not good,
Right.
and I was experiencing what was going on the inside of that as well. And the memory of that, like, for some people, that's not the option that we should be leaning into, especially when a lot of them have their own very significant negative side effects. Like, some of them will make it so that you're infertile. They'll sterilize you.
Right.
Right?
They don't always like tell you all the side effects.
Well, it depends on your level of disability, whether or not they will disclose that information to you, or whether or not they think that it matters for you. Right. And it's complicated because how much faith that we all put in the system in the beginning is built upon science and medicine having respect for different types of information. Now, most of the information on cannabis, although cannabis has been researched more than anything, so there's a lot of evidence here. We've been looking for bad stuff for a long time, and we found some bad stuff, but not nearly enough for how much money we poured into looking for the bad stuff, right? But the research in science and medicine is supposed to support, right? Like, it's like that is what is supported by the system. The problem is that it's at least partially, but a huge part, funded by other molecules that cannabis is shown and proven to work better than and be less toxic than. And there's a huge financial incentive of the system itself to not change. And that science itself, the body of scientists and higher education and universities have played a role in that, in establishing what those standards are. And they devalue narratives. They devalue traditional medicine. It devalues personal stories and lived experience. And it's like, no, we need to have a clinical hospital trial. It's like, yes, that is totally valuable. Absolutely. But what is happening out here in reality is equally as valuable. What is happening in our lives that people are experiencing, like that healing and that truth, it has value as well, scientifically.
And then that's what the work you're doing at
Right.
Network of Applied Pharmacognosy. Did I get it right?
Yeah.
You're bringing those stories with scientifically backed data to the forefront in our community, and you're quite literally changing the face of, some of these stigmas that the industry or consumer faces with that work, which is huge. I hope y'all know how huge it is.
But it's like, it gives me chills thinking that we even have the support that we have for people who believe that this mission is happening, because sometimes it's still for us this is crazy.
It's crazy.
This is crazy that it's happening.
Renaissance of the plan.
But it should be, because stoners and we have been studied as addicts, and we've been studied under a negative lens, and we've been called any number of things that devalue our say. And when it comes down to it, we are the most knowledgeable about the plant. We have the most community experience with other people who benefit from this plant. And that makes us positioned to be the people that understand the best what the medicinal value is of this plant. So the fact that we are not valued scientifically when that is our knowledge set, and it's an exclusive knowledge set, that I feel strongly saying that if you've never smoked weed, you do not know what we're talking about. And if you don't benefit immensely from weed, if it didn't save you, or if it wasn't part of that component of you establishing a balance with your life, then that's good for you. We're all different, but you can't understand what it feels like from our perspective, because this medicine has helped us so much.
The experience is important.
It's important. It shapes our perspective. And so we absolutely should be valued in the research. If anything, our opinion matters more than the average.
Yeah, we're excited to help y'all megaphone all of that as much as we can. So if you could give your neurodivergent self a piece of advice that you wish you knew sooner, or when you were figuring and navigating all this out. So for anyone listening that might be navigating this and trying to pinpoint it or not pinpoint it, is there any tips or support that you can share?
I think my biggest tip is something that I'm still working on myself, and it's something that's just really, really difficult for everyone. It's it's a shared thing for all coming outs. So it's not specific to neurodivergent. It can be like in a queer coming out. It can be in a stoner coming out to your family. It can be.
So we were talking about that. Like you've experienced this coming out of multiple.
They're
Yeah,
similar.
tell me about.
Coming out from when you are open about something that is actively discriminated against. It's a scary experience, and it's very similar. There are many different ways in which we are being discriminated against, and some of them are visible from the outside, and others you have to claim, and you have to identify yourself as. And the choice to do that is both scary and difficult, and it's identity, and it's something that's really difficult. So my biggest advice I'd give to myself when I was younger, / I'm still giving to myself today, I'm working on,
mantra.
is to be forgiving and flexible.
Oh, that's so huge.
You know, and I'm not flexible or forgiving, not to myself, right? Like,
Right.
and this is something that is not something to be ashamed of. And that the struggles that happened before and the things that you did in the unawares and all of that, none of this is a personal deficit, and that it's not something that you have to feel sorry about, and you can feel sorry for yourself. That's okay. Like you can, in short amounts of like,
Every now and then.
in bursts of being like, okay, it's hard. Like I'm going to let myself feel it. It's okay to feel those emotions, but for the most part, that there are all the positive things that are also attributes that you love about yourself. You need to identify those things and focus in on those so much more, because for everything that I think is negative about, like that I've like really thought about, the positive of it outweighs it.
Yeah.
I have so much joy and so much love in my life. My capacity for those two things is off the charts, and I would never change that. Like,
That's profound. Yeah.
and it means that I'm capable of great suffering, which like is this like
pendulum swings both ways.
yeah,
Right?
it's hard.
Yeah.
But my life is very painful. Like physically, I have a lot of pain, and then I'm emotionally intense. So there's a lot of that, and the reprieve of that pain and the relief of that by like experiences that bring me joy is of course explosive and great. And I don't think I would want not to have that. So,
Yeah.
Like I think that people who are out there on their journey of self-discovery, especially at the pathology, when you first get into it and you look into it, like I was talking to someone recently, they were like, I looked it up and I got scared. Like it was like,
It's scary.
It's a lifelong disorder. Like you're never going to not have it. It's like, yeah, but you always had it. It's like,
well, and Google's just never good to kind of research that, but it really paints like a scary, devastating picture when you start looking up some of the words, and
because it's a deficit. It's viewed as something that's not, you're going to be not as good. When the reality is you're probably going to be better at a lot of stuff, actually. But it's the right stuff, and everyone's going to be different. And like, especially if you're neurodivergent, you have to lean into like what works for you and kind of find what is the thing that can allow you to be happy and regulated while also surviving. And that's not an easy task, and coming to terms with that takes flexibility and forgiveness, because you're going to be processing a lot of things. Like for a lot of neurodivergent people who are older, like I was first diagnosed when I was 26, and then I didn't really like fully internalize it until I was like 28. But it wasn't until last year when I was 33 that I met someone who changed my mind about it, and it was like, okay, yeah, like this is something I do identify with. It's interesting. It can be just a hard process. You have to go back through all of your memories of things that didn't make sense, and now they make sense. Things will start clicking into place. Like,
I feel like that's kind of where I am. I'm like, oh, that it gives it a reason, or not.
Yeah.
It doesn't give it a box to fit in. So I don't want to say that, but it gives it this like
a
validation and context of like, I didn't make that weird. It was, I processed it weird.
It's not like an unknown. Yeah, I guess it's no longer just an unknown thing that happened that you didn't understand. Okay, so here's the other thing. Neurodivergent people, if you struggle with like social stuff, you can process your social processing way later. Like it can take like a long time. Like for me, sometimes years.
Yeah, you're thinking about that one thing you said at that one thing.
And the more you start to understand the different ways in which your brain functionality is different, then you can start to identify how it came into play for some of those really complicated social things that you didn't understand. And it can kind of like make it so you do have to go back through and relive those things, which is interesting because you're rethinking about it, being like, oh, like I did that because of this. And I've always felt a lot of like safety in understanding. I've always leaned into the scientific, right?
Of course.
That was like, that was my way of doing it. I was like, I will understand at the atomic scale. And then like getting there being like, we will never understand at the atomic scale. Like, but I think it does for me provide the ability to also move forward in a way that understands myself a little bit better. And that's the way that I have viewed like the journey of it, and finding the community that I did was really unexpected, and the support has been unreal and has absolutely changed. Like saying that I have even helped anyone on this journey with cannabis.
Helped me. Yeah,
it's so crazy.
So it's like, thank you for putting content out around it, because like doctors, you are a doctor, but doctors in the typical medical setting aren't putting content out. Like if anything, they're Googling shit half the time too.
It's so hard. They're not educated.
They're not educated on it. But you and a handful of others online are putting really helpful content out. Even stimming. Let's talk about what this is. I didn't know what that was.
This is a slap bracelet?
I know. And so I learned what stimming was from one of your posts, and in putting myself in front of a camera and then rewatching episodes.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I have so many things that I do on 2X, because then I pick up on it.
You're like fidgeting.
Fidgeting
and like.
And so you become self-aware. So explain what this is and how it could support someone.
Okay. Stimming is short for self-stimulatory behavior. Mm-hmm. It also used to be called, I think, stereotypy. That was what it used to be called. That's its like symptom name.
Yeah.
Whatever. The pathological.
That's like system name.
Yeah. I don't know if they use it anywhere. But yeah, stimming is definitely the more like popular talking about, but it's essentially like any sort of like movement or fidgeting or like something that you do yourself that stimulates you in some sort of sensory way. And it could be like chewing on something. It could be like some people like to like be chewing on like a necklace or your hair or like, and it's basically doing something repetitive and predictable. Mm-hmm. For me, it scratches an itch on the inside of my brain. That's what I would say. I would describe it that way. And then if you're able to do that, then you can focus better on the other things. That
it's like a self-comforting.
You're doing. It is. It's a self-soothing. It's a form of self-soothing. Yeah.
So for anyone not watching this is a slap bracelet, a sequence that you're pushing back and forth. So it's just a light stimulation.
I don't know who I was before this slap bracelet, because this is one of the best. Because it's quiet.
We'll link the Amazon link for anyone.
I got it from a bachelorette party. And I was like, when we left, like my friend was like, who were you before that? And I was like, I don't know.
Yeah, that's huge. I like spin my rings sometimes, or I pick the side of my fingernails.
Yeah, many of us have very socially hidden stims that we have adapted to mask. So like many of us have created stims that are more publicly hideable or presentable, etc. But like, It just depends. And I think we should be allowed to, allowed is such a weird term to use.
Support it.
Yeah. And then just not feel weird about it or not feel any shame. And it's definitely about not looking, it's a not professional thing, I think, but that has to do with professionalism being linked to neuronormativity, and that your ultimate professional self would be the ultimate neuronormal, high achieving, everything perfect neuronormal person wouldn't be sitting here with a sequence slap.
But the more I get to know highly successful people, the more I'm like, you're all neurodivergent.
Yeah, that's true too.
It takes this element of something different.
I don't know if neurotypical people exist. It's like
I'm saying that's theory.
But it certainly exists that people can buy into neuronormativity and can shape their behaviors and prejudices around neuronormativity.
Right.
And so I think that's kind of where we're at, is figuring out how to eradicate neuronormativity as a plague on the earth.
We're going to turn the earth weird, and it's going to be...
It'll be so much better.
Well, I thank you for coming into town to Nashville to
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, we're really excited about the work that you're doing. So if you want to support them and Riley in the work that they're doing, again, it's Network of Applied Pharmacognosy.org. We're going to link it all. And then I don't want to mess up your social handle. So if someone wants to follow you, where would they go?
So it's just Miyabe PhD. So my name, Miyabe PhD, like all one word. And yes, come make LinkedIn a better place if you're listening.
Yes.
Yes. Come be cool on LinkedIn.
And LinkedIn's a cool platform.
It is.
Because they don't censor as hard.
It is such a cool place, but then also I think it could be cooler.
Yeah. Well, we need more Divergent people on there making the content. So go make content and find your community wherever you are and whatever you identify as, and let your community support you.
Yeah, all neurodivergent people I encourage to make content, because I also think it's a liberating experience.
Oh, that's huge. That's a good tool.
It's a voice. Yeah, it's like a voice and like an ownership thing that has changed my life in a huge way.
Yeah, make more content. We want to hear from you.
And we want to hear from you. Yeah. Also, I want to hear from you.
And let us know. Hit the comments if you want to see certain content or questions answered from guests like Miyabe. So thank you for coming on, and I look forward to continuing to support you.
It's absolutely same.
Yeah. Thank you.